within the energy space, and that's my phone. As well as a number of analyst and digital roles in financial services. But I've been with Block 8 for the past 3 years, and looking forward to delivering on our mission statement, which is to use distributed ledger technology to create a fairer and more efficient world.
That is a great mission.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so let's delve into that submission. I'm looking forward to hearing all about that.
Alrighty. So I'll grab the screen. Cool. So a little bit about Block 8, and then we'll get into the case study where we proposed to the South Australian government to use a public permission blockchain for what they were attempting to achieve with their interoperability project. So a little bit about us. We are a leading blockchain product development company. We've got, it's mainly services that we deliver, but we also have a portfolio of ventures. So sometimes we take equity in the ventures that we develop. We've now got over 45 staff, over 2 offices. We've got 10 ventures or more, I think, in the portfolio. And we've helped deliver over 250 million in enterprise value. Our core capabilities really are in that product development, software development, and commercialization capabilities. And we've done a number of projects in fintech, regtech, and proptech, and others. We try and contribute to the discourse as much as possible. We've gotten involved in a number of submissions and papers, and we've got a bunch of educational materials on our website. If you go to block8.com/blockchain. So as I said, there are core competencies mainly focused around software development, product innovation, and consulting and commercialization. Bunch of customers, you can see them on our website. Okay, let's get into the fun stuff. So I'd like to tell a bit of a story about our journey. I assume some basic familiarity with blockchain. We do get a little bit technical in the middle, and at the end, we're left wondering whether or not there's going to be a sequel. So we'll do questions at the end if there should be plenty of time. So a little bit of background. Once upon a time, there was a group of kingdoms called the Council of Australian Governments. They got together in 2018 and agreed on a national approach, a national digital approach for conveyancing. In 2014, Property Exchange Australia, PEXA, was formed, co-founded by the states and some banks, and kicks off development with a completely digital property title exchange and settlement platform, integrating with the state-based land title offices, banks, and the RBA. And by 2018, the states were starting to mandate that implementation for fully electronic conveyancing be completed. And then in late 2018, PEXA actually sold to a private consortium for 1.6 billion shortly after claiming over 50% of the market. The rest of the market was still paper. So at the time, with PEXA's 6 billion in annual revenue, 750,000 transactions per year, there was an alternative ELNO company called Simply that kicked off. It was backed by the ASX. It was looking to bring a competitive offering to the market. And shortly after, South Australia and New South Wales got together to investigate whether or not there should be competition in that market, and investigated options for interoperability between these Electronic Lodgement Network Operators. And late 2019, in October, the South Australian government released an RFI on distributed ledger technology for Electronic Lodgement Network Operator interoperability, so DLT for ELNO IOP. So in the information provided, there was a number of models. There were 4 models, actually, of interoperability that had been developed by the team for consideration ahead of potential proposed solutions using distributed ledgers. So none of the existing models used blockchain. They all relied upon existing technology. So workflow and data synchronization between these distinct entities and their distinct systems was effected using a messaging API. So the first one was called Direct. The idea there was just to simply mandate that new and existing monolithic ELNOs were to interoperate via an API without necessarily specifying a standard. The second was called the Information Hub model. And that was similar to Direct, but would deliver a standardized information exchange hub, probably similar to a publish and subscribe or a push-pull service. There was a central hub model, so a single centralized network operator, similar to what we have today with PEXA, but strip away all of the front-end related services into distinct entities that would plug back into that central hub. And then there was the infrastructure model, so also essentially what we have today, but with the ability for additional companies and additional players to supply quite thin front-end services all plugging into the same infrastructure ELNO. But note that that last one didn't preclude the provision of retail services on the front end. So all were quite similar in that they were variations of all having a standard API specification, more or less, to pull data in between the companies, between these ELNOs, and to segment the current ELNO business as it currently stood with PEXA, so that some parts operated from a centralized entity, which I thought was a little strange considering that we were originally here to break up an existing centralized monopoly. But certainly one can understand the appeal. Centralized systems are quite efficient, but they do come with downsides. And without understanding how to design decentralized systems, if all you understand is how centralized systems work, then it can be quite difficult to realize the benefits that decentralized systems can offer. So Block 8 teamed up with our friends at Ernst & Young for a joint response, given our broad alignment on what we think the Australian techno futurescape should look like. We even flew to Adelaide. We gave a presentation, spent a bunch of hours answering questions. We also prepared a follow-up response that was as big as the original response, a follow-up paper responding to a bunch of queries. So our response covered effectively the following. Why centralized systems can be troublesome when sharing critical information. The general benefits of blockchain and blockchain-based systems. How public blockchains can be used by enterprise who are typically looking for a private environment in which to operate, as well as our design for a blockchain-specific, or a blockchain-based rather, interoperability design. So we called it the 5th model. In addition to the first 4, we just called it a distributed infrastructure ELNO model because it seemed as if it was most like that last one I mentioned before in terms of the infrastructure model. So the core of our thesis was, in terms of DLT for interoperability, was to operate the common processes in between these electronic lodgement market operators as a shared process between them. So they were all looking at a single source of truth. that was distributed or shared using smart contracts on a distributed ledger. So the first thing to do is map and then split the proprietary and the common domain models. So the ELNO domain model would live as a separate component within the business, as you can see on the right in that dotted region. So the idea would be is that would be wrapped by a set of smart contracts that represented the shared business process. And then that would be distributed amongst the market participants by being deployed on an industry-operated blockchain. So if you contrast this to some of the other models, and this is the this is the direct model, the bilateral model. You've got, we've mentioned this in our response. With this sort of an approach, you have quadratic increase in industry cost, because you have to implement, the industry as a whole has to implement multiple implementations of a standard. You do risk divergence in those implementations, even if you do have a standard. The upgrade coordination, overhead is significantly higher, and it increases linearly the more companies that get involved, obviously. And the risk of data mismatch also becomes quite high. So you have a greater expense in trying to manage that with these connected centralized systems. And you can see that connection between the organizations there, that synchronization message path between those web servers. That's how these centralized companies would affect the synchronization of their workflow and their data. Now, if you compare that with a decentralized solution architecture that I showed before, it's the core of the back office that's unified with other businesses of the same type. You can think about it like a common frame of reference for the things you need to collaborate with others on in your network. So you have a unified shared service. So the costs associated with developing, implementing and maintaining that should be shareable. You've got relatively simple upgrade coordination because it's effectively a singular system. So there's just a single code base, and any upgrades can be implemented to all nodes at the same time. You've got an extremely low risk comparatively of data error between the entities. So you have no reconciliation processes to manage, and there's no risk of error or divergence in API implementation because you've just got the one implementation. If that one implementation is correct, then it's correct everywhere. You can also flexibly provision additional parties, which is not necessarily something that was strongly considered in the original set of models. So we attempted to make a pretty strong case for DLT in our response. So we set a public-private blockchain supporting a set of industry standard smart contracts that operate the common process and domain model will deliver the following benefits. By allowing new entrants to deploy apps on top of these smart contracts, you're providing a level of control and data quality guarantees you simply can't obtain using APIs. And so given that, you're maximizing the potential for market innovation. If you're allowing anybody direct access, then the creativity is maximized. It's also the lowest possible barrier to entry, to the point on the previous slide. So it's kind of like downloading and deploying a pre-built API server for one of the other models. You can just get started. You can also minimize the cost and time in data processing. So by leveraging the guarantees provided by consensus. You remove any need to reconcile information between ELNOs. This minimizes your cost. You can minimize the risk of data error through handoffs by ensuring data synchronization using consensus. You have a very fast, effective business speed. So whilst blockchains are known to have slow write speeds, we say that the effective business speed is much faster because you eliminate these data processing processes and the risk of data handoffs that require all of these operational controls to manage. So not only is it faster and cheaper, but because you've got those guarantees of that data veracity, you can start to automate reliably some of your own business processes. Centralization risk, of course, is minimized, and you can avoid any given market player from leveraging market power to obtain an unfair advantage. And of course, there's the upgrade coordination overhead. So it's far simpler to deploy and upgrade all of the logic across the network, given that there's only effectively one program to upgrade. So this is in contrast with APIs, again, where each ELNO would have to upgrade both a client and a server, and multiplied by however many companies are actually operating in that market. So the architecture of public permission blockchains as opposed to another type of blockchain. So it's important to note that the blockchain state or the data is publicly available. You could potentially have it fully encrypted or partially encrypted. And we note that only permissioned actors can participate in rights, i.e. interacting with smart contracts in terms of calling their functions, as well as participating in consensus. So the data can also, with that first point, the data can also be partially or fully encrypted or decrypted based on your access keys. So even though you might have a public database that doesn't mean much to most people, you sort of inherit two properties. One is that the actors who need to access that data can with their decryption keys, and the other one is that any public observer can fully verify to be correct the full state of the blockchain, assuming that the starting state was correct and there are no bugs in the smart contracts. So it's interesting to think about this in a broader context. It's especially when you consider this may be a way forward for more than just property exchange. This same public permissioned common industry processes encoded in smart contracts that are shared between all these industry participants. I think there are lots of common industry processes that would fit this model. If you consider that such a model would provide an open platform for digital innovation by leveraging the ability to program that shared source of truth, that's quite an exciting benefit. The provision of reliable and verifiable public records. So whenever you have different organizations that are meaning to share the same source of truth or be operating off the same piece of information, that information doesn't necessarily have to be private. It just simply might be a public record, but yet we still have major discrepancies between individual or siloed centralized systems of record because they're either entered incorrectly, you've got these errors of systems communicating with one another, or they simply might change and go out of date. So if you have a public database effectively that everyone can draw the source of truth from, all of these problems would go away. And similarly, you could also potentially automate some public service delivery. So things that dealing with claims to the government, licensing processes, and other digital rights management. So with EY, we're quite happy to share that vision with them. They publicly support the Ethereum mainnet, and they're developing the baseline sort of products for enterprise. But I think the point here is that it doesn't have to be a permissionless blockchain, right? As it is with Ethereum mainnet. We can pick any blockchain that fits our given trust context, i.e. how much all the participants trust each other. And then we can tune the consensus algorithm and the way the blockchain is set up according to that trust context to gain back significant performance. So we don't necessarily have to sacrifice all of our performance and go and implement a fully trustless system in all cases. So I think if we just imagine if we had all common or non-value adding industry processes running on these public permission blockchains operated by consortia or community groups within a whole country, the economic benefits of that could be incredible. That would then be a truly advanced digital economy. It'd be quite exciting. Okay, so then what happened? Ninth of September, news breaks in the AFR. These two guys. On the left is Stephen Marshall. He's the South Australian Premier. He's a well-known blockchain enthusiast. And on the right is Victor Dominello, the New South Wales Minister for Customer Service. He's a well-known tireless hero of digital innovation. They both had a really good day because just 2 days before, their governments, the South Australian and New South Wales governments, drive for a national approach for ELNO competition and interoperability succeeded, and all of the states accepted to go forward. Whereas before it was only PEXA. So the regulator, ARNEC, they put in legislation, they committed to putting in legislation rather by mid-2021 and wanted the system to go live by the end of 2021. Based on the comments from their respective executives, simply the new ELNO entrant was quite pleased with the outcome. PEXA, however, understandably, probably not so much, given the history and where they've come from. So everything looked perfect for Australia to lead the world in developing a production-grade, blockchain-based national utility. But then we received a letter on the 10th, a day later, from the South Australian Office of the Registrar General. The process had been abandoned to ensure national consistency. The ARNEC timeframes appeared to be quite swift, and that may have played a role into stopping any extraneous work on investigating alternative solutions. We remain hopeful that a new joint effort by the states will actually emerge after this, but at this time we're still waiting on further information. In any event though, I personally encourage everyone to be aware of the strengths of this technology and help to play a role in changing mindsets to ensure that DLT is appropriately considered when any kind of initiative for startup or enterprise or government comes up. So I'll leave you this quote from Paul Brodie over at Ernst & Young. And if anybody has any questions.
Yes, Sam, I have 2 questions from the Q&A on the live stream. They are both from Embarrassing Father. First off, he says, I'm not familiar with the term quadratic redundancy. What is it? Is it 4 times?
Yeah, so it simply means that as you add more and more participants, the number of connections any individual participant needs to make, or the network as a whole, increases. So for any given participant, the number of connections you need to make goes up by 2. So if you've got 2 participants, then one entity would need to make 2 implementations, one to provide and one to receive. And then every time you add another one, that participant needs to add another 2. And another entrant comes in, then you need to add another 2. And then the whole thing just basically goes up really quickly in terms of the number of bilateral connections that you need to make. But when you've got a shared system, you only need to upgrade that once. So it's quite easy to sort of manage and orchestrate.
That makes sense. Following up to that, he asks, please say more about guaranteed data veracity. If a fraudster misstates off-chain the value or ownership of a property, what does data veracity mean? Oh, I assume you have to verify before it goes on, right?
Yeah, data veracity is just basically the extent to which you can trust the data that you've got. It's just the quality of the data. Look, in terms of what this was going for, it simply was a system to manage the workflow between all of the lodgement operators. The source of truth for titles still remains at the Land Titles Office. So PEXA, over time, since 2014, had done a lot of work with those land and titles offices to digitize their databases so that they could be interacted with digitally and affect a trade or a transfer digitally. So that sort of source of truth for who owns what, it wouldn't be on blockchain. It's simply a shared back office system to help all these companies that are offering the same service interoperate with one another. Because what you're trying to prevent is you have a vendor that's a customer of one company, let's say Simply, and you've got a home buyer that's a customer of PEXA. If they don't interoperate, they can't talk to each other and affect the sale. So either one or the other in that scenario would be forced to move to the alternative lodgement operator. So interoperability is designed to solve that. So you don't ever have that problem. I don't think Simply is live yet. So everyone's still going through PEXA. PEXA's still got the national monopoly. But the idea is for that interoperability framework to be in place before Simply goes live, and provide an open, competitive market for other entrants to join. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think our connection is dropping off a little bit.
Okay.
So it did make sense. So I guess the main purpose of the system is look and identify what parts are common to all parties and make that the blockchain part, so the data can be shared in an elegant, non-redundant way.
Right. Well,
when I say non-redundant, I mean the data is redundant. Yeah, okay. When I say non-redundant, I mean you don't have to have it in different hosted by different people with their own silos. It's shared by all, right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of right. So it's logically centralized, and that's what you mean by non-redundant. So it's logically one system, but it's physically decentralized, and it's operated by physically separated, legally separated and physically separated entities. So that's how you get the benefits of the efficiency of a centralized system, but not necessarily inherit some of the side effects of a centralized system. But you do, of course, it does of course come with trade-offs. So there's the privacy, transparency trade-off. If you need to maintain privacy, then you need to introduce, some clever cryptography, and that, the risk of that cryptography being broken or keys leaking out needs to be balanced with just how sensitive the information is, or whether or not the information goes stale over a period of time, and whether you can bear that risk. The alternative argument to that would be something like, well, it's probably no more, it's no more of a security risk than any given centralized system anyway. Computers get hacked all the time. There are security vulnerabilities in software all over the place. You could argue that this is not necessarily any riskier, or significantly riskier. It's objectively riskier from a cybersecurity perspective, because instead of having a database in one location that's protected by the cybersecurity arrangements of a given entity, it's now in N locations. So your system, your blockchain system, and the data and the underlying that is only as strong as the cybersecurity regime of the weakest entity. So if say you got 5 participants and one of those 5 doesn't have a very good cybersecurity control framework, then that's the weakest link.
So what if, let's say next month, they decided to implement this? What are the steps to go about doing something like that, and how long would it take approximately?
So the first thing that you'd need to do is you'd need to map that that common workflow. So you'd effectively have to sit down with the likes of PEXA and other sort of interested parties and map and agree what that common workflow would be, including that sort of core domain model. So that's the data that you actually want to share, and then the business processes around that would be how you're going to manipulate and transform that data. So that would probably take a while, I would say. From there, you would, it's likely that you would want to do a proof of concept or a pilot system. You'd have to go through technology selection. You'd have to map all of your non-functional requirements. So those things I was mentioning before around, what's the sensitivity of the information that we're dealing with? Does it, how private is it? Does it go stale? To what extent do we need to encrypt or permission in reads, or can we have it as a truly public permissioned blockchain where anybody can download the information of the blockchain and attempt to read or analyze it? The identity solution also needs to be worked out. So there's a few things that sort of weren't, obviously fully designed, because it's just a response to an RFI, not an RFP. Am I still there?
Yes.
I look to have been frozen to myself.
I can still hear you. You do look frozen, okay, but I can still hear you.
So the way in which data gets into the system also needs to be very carefully managed. So that means, an appropriate identity system needs to be set up such that we can gain some assurances over who's putting information into the system, such that the other participants can know who they're dealing with. So effectively, that just comes down to key management, right? You need a sophisticated key management system to make sure that both companies and individuals who are transacting on the platform can basically interoperate with the blockchain system. And for me, that sounds a lot like an extension of a digital identity framework. So we've thought about this a bit, and we've got some ideas about how that would work. In terms of how long, it's a good question. typically Block 8 aims to release an MVP within 6 months. We think that's a good sweet spot in terms of speed to market and investment of capital. You go any faster, you're sort of releasing too little. Go any slower, you're sort of putting too much into your first release. So I think you should be looking at, getting a robust pilot out within 6 months and then going from there. Am I still frozen?
All right. Yes, you're still frozen. I don't think we have any other. Oh, hold on. We have one more question. I'm not sure that that's still going live, so we'll keep going and we'll check it later. Maybe we'll have to do a recording of this to post. So, is there any interaction between financial institutions and blockchain, or is settlement facilitated off-chain between ELN and bank?
Well, you can take it as far as you like, right? So with what we proposed, we kept the settlement as it was. So settlement would still occur as facilitated by one or more network operators between banks and the RBA. So we were proposing, just as a first, straightforward, simple step without anything that's necessarily controversial relating to title or money on a blockchain, just simply manage the workflow, or the core workflow, the common workflow between the network operators to achieve that interoperability. That was, we think that's a reasonable first step to prove the technology and the benefits associated with it.
Okay, Sam, I think we're losing you there. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Is that better?
Oh, you're back. All right. Yeah, that is better.
My camera crashed. I just fixed it on the fly.
That happens. What we might do is we can record this separately, and instead of leaving this live session online, we can just post the recording session afterwards. There are no other questions in the stream, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you so much for taking your time this afternoon to come and talk to us about this potential project.
We'll see.
Hopefully, the government decides to go ahead with this. I think it will be really interesting to have something tangible to talk about, especially when we're sitting about our national roadmap meetings. That'll be really cool.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it would be a shame to not consider the technology.
For your time today.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Sorry about the technical difficulties that I've moved recently to PMOD. My internet is not great here. Hopefully, I can make that better for next month's meetup. And I think everyone missed the introduction because I forgot to press go live on YouTube. You have to do that twice for some reason with this system that I'm working. So thank you. I'm Adriana. You just heard from Sam Brooks of Block 8, and we will catch you next month. Thanks. Bye.